You are listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Happy Wednesday. It's Hump Day. So it's been Hump Day all day. It's nice to be halfway through the week. You know, I work for myself, and I work out of my home office. So I sometimes wonder, what good does Hump Day do me? I look forward to the weekend, but then I am always here, and I'm always part of what's going on with my weekend, with my work. And so, there is no escape. There is no weekend. But the weekend does offer a little bit of reprieve from getting phone calls and doing stuff like that. So happy Wednesday nonetheless. Welcome to my show. I'm Scotty Roberts. This is the Intrepid radio program. And you're listening on Odyssey1.com. That's ODYSY1.com, or one of the Odyssey affiliates or iHeartRadio. You can go over there to the Odyssey Radio Network and hear the audio version of this show. You can also go over to my YouTube page, Mr. Scotty Roberts, and there you can see the video version, the simulcast of this, as well as join in the live chat room and join the other people who are fans of this show, followers of the show, who like to contribute. You can have great conversations going on there. So come and join us if you haven't yet. And then subscribe. You can hit the little subscribe button and also the little bell to get alerts for when this show comes live on YouTube. But just as a reminder, we broadcast every weekday night, Monday through Friday, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. Central Time, and of course 7 p.m. Left Coast Time. So come and join us. Thank you for being here. Join us over on the YouTube channel if you haven't yet. I am going to continue my series on Star Trek. Now, I like, as I've mentioned before and you've heard, I like to get pretty serious with my shows. There are topics that move me, that motivate me, that emote me, some that anger me, and I like to get into those topics and dig deep. Even the fun stuff like Star Trek, I like to dig a little deep, and the reason I do that is, yes, I want to be entertaining to you. I want you to have a fun time listening to or watching this show. But at the same time, I also want you to go away with something when you leave. Take something with you that's meaningful. And so that's really the motivation behind the way I do my shows and the way I do radio. Keep in mind, too, my inception into radio was paranormal radio, and then I went into political talk radio, which always seemed serious, despite trying to, at many times, lighten it with a bit of levity. It's like today. I could talk for a whole hour or two just about the whole impeachment hearing thing. Now, this show is not about politics, but I will mention this. I think impeachment is damaging to the country whenever it happens, to no matter whom it happens. And if you are partisan in your approach to impeachment in this country, I think you are creating a problem. And what you've got right now is 3 years culmination of trying to delegitimize the current sitting president, and from mostly partisan sides of the aisle. And now it's funny that while they're looking, digging, scratching, trying to find absolutely anything they can to impeach this president or take him down, 5 days ago a report of a whistleblower comes out. Oh, and now they've got great new information, and now they're going to go for the impeachment hearings. I think there's a lot more to this behind the scenes. I also think the left is going to have the rug pulled out from under them very severely. And this is going to be like Wile E. Coyote from the Roadrunner cartoons, standing beneath the big boulder on his catapult, pulling the string, and having the boulder roll off and squash him. That's pretty much what you've got going here. I liken this whole impeachment debate not debate, this whole impeachment topic and the hearings and the way they're being carried out right now to like this. I'm a parent, and let's say I'm a bad parent, and I'm just looking for things. I don't praise my kids at all. I don't cheer them up. I don't uplift them when they do good things. All I do is look for the chinks in the armor, and all I do is look for ways to tell my kid how stupid they are, how bad they are, how much in need of discipline and punishment they are. What kind of parent would you think I was if I was that way? And let's say I'm out there and I'm looking for just some great reason to ground my kid or to spank him, and I can't find anything. I keep coming up with things I think are good things, but I haven't landed on the thing, and all of a sudden, he does something that I think, aha, I've got you. Get in here, I'm going to spank you now. Isn't that kind of like what, even though you take the parent-child equation out of it, isn't that kind of what the left is doing in government nowadays? Right now you've got the House. I will say this will be my last statement on the impeachment thing. You've got the House, which is a majority Democrat. The impeachment votes, whatever is going to happen, is going to fall right along those party lines. I guarantee it, with rare exception. Now, that becomes a partisan thing, a political thing, as opposed to something that the House in its entirety or majority believes is something that's really needing to be done. The problem with it is that it's then got to go to the Senate. The Senate is overpopulated by Republicans. They're going to quash it. So the Democrats should know going in, there's really nothing to this, and there is no impeachable offense. The only offense being committed, in my opinion, is the offense of constantly trying to look to delegitimize, rather than actively make government work and get things done. It's a do-nothing Congress. And then you will see, by the way, the Senate will quickly, readily, handily dismantle and squash anything that comes out of the House on impeachment. It's just not going to happen, folks. And it's not an impeachable offense. You watch what happens next. The Democrats are poised to take a whistleblower's account, somebody who wasn't even there firsthand about the things he was whistleblowing on, so he didn't hear them firsthand. There's a second whistleblower that's joined him. It has been revealed that they were both employees of the Clinton campaign. So they are very partisan in their approach. And the Democrats in the House want to start impeachment hearings on something they've never seen, something that is secondhand information, something of which they have no real knowledge of what really exists, until Trump yesterday pulled the rug out from under them and said, you know what, that phone call, I'm going to sign and release that information so you can look at it openly. You'll see nothing untoward happen. So there you go, folks. That's your government at work for you. And if I was doing a political talk show, I could go on for quite a bit about this in quite a great amount of detail. Instead, tune into Rocky Stucci's Situation Room, which is 2 hours after the beginning of this show, so about an hour and 40 minutes from now. I will be joining Rocky today, and we'll be talking about some of these things, I'm sure, in about an hour and 40 minutes from now. So thanks for being here to listen to what I have to talk about today. Let's move totally out of politics. Brush yourself off, take a shower, put a cold cloth to your neck, the back of your neck, clear yourself of the grotesque, nasty pussiness of politics, and let's move into something fun and enjoyable. Captain Kirk. Now, you know I've been doing a little mini-series here on Spock, the psychology of Spock. I morphed a bit into the psychology of Trek yesterday in general. Today, I want to look at my hero from Star Trek. I grew up as a little boy idolizing Captain Kirk. I grew up, as many of you know already, watching the original series. I will say, I'm old, but I'm not too old. I caught the original series in the late 60s 1 or 2 times in its original run, and then I didn't catch it again until I was 9 or 10 years old in the rampant, not network, the syndication of the series in constant reruns, perpetually every day of the week. And there I was, glued to my TV. I don't care if I saw that episode 25 times already. I would rewatch it every time. I could have quoted you chapter and verse, what character was who. My trivia on Trek was enormously high by age 12. And, of course, some of those things I've moved on from and forgotten in my older age, pushing 60 now. So I do want to re-emphasize that Kirk was my hero. He was the hero I grew up. I wasn't into sports when I was a kid. I didn't have sports heroes. I knew who Harmon Killebrew was from the Minnesota Twins because he was big name in Minneapolis, Minnesota during the Twin season. I knew eventually who Fran Tarkenton was, the quarterback for the Vikings in Minnesota. But that's as far as my limit of sports went. I was not an outside creature that enjoyed doing sports. Such sweaty pursuits, to quote Diego de la Vega from the Zorro movies. Pardon me for the cough and the lack of my using my cough button. So I grew up idolizing the character. As I got older, I started to really appreciate the actor and what he brought to the role and what the writers brought to the role, how William Shatner himself formed who Captain Kirk became. And there's a lot of psychology for me wrapped up in Kirk. Some of you heard a radio show I did a long time ago where I went through an article I had written 20, 25 years ago about how Kirk was the once and future and ever-present captain in my life and a lot of kids' lives, boys especially from my era. Kirk became the subconscious surrogate father, if you will, to me, who was a fatherless boy. Had an older brother, but by about a year, but he was into his own things. Kirk I idolized for those reasons. And some of you might say, how could you idolize Kirk as a father figure? He wasn't even a father in the fictional sense in that series until much later in the movies when he discovered he had a son. Well, I don't think he discovered it. He rediscovered his adult son. It's because he epitomized things in his character and the way he did things that I, as a young boy, hadn't had role modeled for me, but I saw it role modeled in a fictional science fiction television series. And that's why my subconscious latched onto Kirk. But I want to go into some things that I've pulled up here. There's an article especially I'm going to be referring to today. It was written by, let me give you a bit of her background, Susan Viglione. She has over 30 years experience in the field of construction management. She's a senior project director at Harvard University. She leads a group of project managers in planning and implementation of capital projects. She holds a BA in philosophy and an MS in civil engineering from Stanford University in Massachusetts, and in counseling psychology from Lesley University. And she, at the time she wrote this article, she's pursuing her PhD in depth psychology at Pacifica Graduate Institute. Now that's just a little background to tell you that this person, Susan Viglione, wrote an article, Personality Type in Depth, and she called her article Becoming Captain Kirk. Now I'm going to borrow some information from her article, so I wanted to give credit where credit was due. And this thing has been also edited by several different people. I don't need to name, there's like 6 other people that have edited this article along with her. But I want to start by something she says at the end of her article as I introduce this topic of Kirk. Using psychological typology, types that's stereotypes or personality types, archetypes within psychology, To trace the arc of a fictional character like Captain Kirk's development from this brash, playful, brilliant, but irresponsible boy to a seasoned veteran with greater understanding of his own strengths and vulnerabilities provides a vivid illustration of the power of understanding type or archetype in a very thorough way. In all its guises, it recognizes the expression of ego-syntonic and dystonic function attitudes through archetypes. It's a powerful tool for growth and personal development, to explore strange inner worlds, to assist in achieving one's highest potential and living one's purpose with integrity and authenticity. That's the true final frontier for most people. And you see a lot of people nowadays, and I'm going to tie this into the whole underlying thought beneath this. A lot of people nowadays wander through life and don't really know who they are, what they are, where they're going, what they want to do with their life, what they want to be, what they want to become. They're a bit shiftless in that. Many of us, if we go to college or don't go to college, sometimes we pursue careers. Other times we get that job and we stay at that job and we go through life with the motions. And many people I know of come 20 years down the line and regret the things they didn't do rather than the things they did do, because they didn't do the things they really wanted out of life. I have my own regrets, but I'm a pretty happy guy. I love life. One regret is that I didn't become a billionaire early on in life. That sure would have solved a lot of other headaches throughout the course of my career. But we all have these things that we look back to. But looking at Kirk, I'm going to jump over to some information I've got here about Kirk as somebody that maybe some of you don't know much about him. I would assume that if you're tuned into my show, you've got an idea who he is. For those of you who are not Star Trek initiated, James T. Kirk was the captain of the Starship Enterprise. And although being a fictional character, Kirk is a great example of courageous leadership and endeavor. Through his career, he led a team of individuals through the most creative and challenging circumstances ever created. Now, by the way, folks, remember, keep this in the context of this is a fictional character that was written for science fiction. He negotiated peace treaties with numerous races. He led a ship of men and women into the unknown and ultimately gave his life, further on down the line in the movies, for what he believed in. What a great example of a courageous leader. Now, William Shatner, who played Captain Kirk, was really a sex symbol in the late 60s, late 20th century, you could say, due to his role in Star Trek and other TV roles. He as well as being an attractive man, women were drawn to his nature, his character, which were portrayed in these roles. He was reckless, he was funny, strong throughout his role as Kirk, which were essential characteristics of an alpha male. And I was personally brought up, sorry, I get scratchy throat, and my gear right here, I don't have an exact cough button. I gotta go dig it up and click something on my screen, so bear with me. I was brought up watching Star Trek. I can appreciate Kirk. I can appreciate William Shatner's leading role as Kirk. And I was amazed by his missions and what he stood for throughout the series. There were many things. I was just talking to somebody yesterday. I'm trying to remember who it was. Oh, it was John Penman, the guy who makes my hats. He was mentioning that on his social media, somebody had said something about Kirk and something about bigotry was brought up. And he remembered that line from one of the episodes. It was... the episode would have been the one with the Romulans, where we're first introduced to them. Was it not Errand of Mercy? That might have been it. But it's revealed that the Romulans are like wicked step-cousins to the Vulcans, and they looked the same with the eyebrows and the pointed ears. And one of the bridge crew started looking at Spock and had a great bigotry about this. And Kirk stood up and he says to this guy, he says, "Mister," he says, "you will keep your bigotry in your quarters, and it will not appear here on my bridge." These were the kinds of little things you saw in the series, and also the things that made up who James Kirk was as an iconic leader. Gene Roddenberry, in creating the character, said that he was creating him to be the Horatio Hornblower of outer space. Now, if you don't know who Horatio Hornblower is, you've got to broaden your horizons and open yourself up to some literature. If you want to see a good movie, an old movie made in the mid-1950s, you can see Gregory Peck playing Horatio Hornblower. It was during the Napoleonic Wars. He was a sea captain, a British sea military naval captain. And you could also see a great mini-series of movies that was done on Horatio Hornblower, God, probably 15 to 20 years ago now, but newer. And so that character, the author, Forrester, brought that character up from ensign all the way up through admiral in his series of books. And this is who Kirk was supposed to be loosely based on. So what made him this iconic leader? Move on from a little bit of the hero worship, which I can get into with Captain Kirk pretty easily, into the true grit that made him an excellent example of a leader. And Kirk was admired. He was followed for the following reasons. 1, he valued those around him and he fought for them. Now, often leaders look out for themselves and they're sometimes willing to shoot a hostage, but Kirk valued his crew and he went to the end of the galaxy and back to help them, literally, in some of the movies that you saw later. So Kirk valued the people underneath him. He knew that he was the captain of nothing without them. So he commanded power and allegiance. His crew needed to know he was strong enough and able enough to make the hard choices under extreme pressure. And although this didn't always make him the most popular commander, it was necessary for the Enterprise crew's survival and its mission. Kirk was a learner. He was known for being an intellectual. Now, even though you look at the series overall, you step back and look back at the whole canon of Star Trek, you compare a Captain Picard, who was the intellectual, and the way he did things, versus Kirk, who was more the on the ground. Kirk could take you out in a fight, and could also be intellectual. Most people are fooled by the charming practicality of Captain Kirk, but he was known back in the Starfleet Academy as a bookworm who was always carrying around books. Do you remember in The Wrath of Khan, that movie, how Spock, as a birthday gift for Kirk, got him an antiquarian book, Tale of Two Cities by Dickens? And Kirk prized that kind of thing because he loved books. And through his leadership characteristic of learning, he found strategy, he found cunning, and he could see solutions around impossible situations. And a great reason to study situation leadership, just in case you find yourself in hand-to-hand combat with an alien on a barren planet, you could look to Captain Kirk. But they also implemented into this character real leadership qualities that made him what he was. He was strong at what he did. And he had, another reason, he had a diverse and eclectic leadership team around him. This would scare most leaders, but his command crew were as varied and diverse as they come. And indeed, Spock, his number 2, had almost the exact opposite of personality to James Kirk, as you saw in our little analysis of him over the last couple of days. However, they got along famously, and eventually as it was worth pushing through their differences to have someone's perspective on something so different from his own. And Kirk and Spock became the inseparable friends. And of course, the triumvirate was made up with Dr. McCoy, who was kind of the foil in between both of them. So you got to ask yourself, when you look at Captain Kirk, what qualities can we extract from the leadership of James Kirk? Now, we're going to look at that when we come back. We got to cut out to break. I see we're right on top of it. 2 minutes. I'll be right back, and we'll pick this up where we left off. Sit tight. All right, folks, we're back from that break. Thank you for sticking around. Thanks for coming back in. I love this topic. I love talking about Kirk. I love talking about Star Trek. Yeah, it's not going to solve the world's problems, but there are certainly things you can pull psychologically from the series and from these characters that might be able to make you somebody who looks at these things in your own self. And then, of course, in turn, Star Trek can be instrumental in making you a better, more rounded, more solid person. That's my belief about this. Literature serves a purpose. And Star Trek is literature. It's visual literature, but it's also got all the literature built up around it, the literature that based it, that was the foundation for it. So you can learn things from these things. And by the way, folks, I'm Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. And you can go hear it audibly over at odyssey1.com. That's ODYSY1.com and see wherever it's played. And you can also come over to this YouTube channel where you're watching it simulcast in video. And you can see my face and see the things we're talking about. You're mostly looking at my face and watching me talk. But the best part of the YouTube live stream is that you can join the live chat room during these conversations and during these shows. So come on over. It's Mr. Scotty Roberts over at YouTube. Now, we left off with talking about what qualities can we extract from the leadership of James T. Kirk. And I think it's a brilliant study of past leaders, iconic men and women, people of infamy and inspirational leaders, but you can't extract values from them to apply to your own leadership. If you can't do that, the point is lost in studying them. Even with this fictional character who was built out of an amalgam of different things. So here's a few suggestions of what you can learn from the leadership of this fictional future starship captain, what was built into the character. And I'd like to see what you think about this. If you're over in the chat room, tell me what you think. Number one, don't value yes men over someone who can challenge you. Now, before I get into this, I will say something about myself. When I talk about stuff or when I pontificate on any given topic, I am wide open for criticism, constructive criticism. Don't call me an ass and don't give me any information. Call me an ass and tell me what I'm missing. I'm wide open to learning. Now, that does not mean I will not argue my point, defend my position, or fight you in the process. But you're going to have to convince me that your position is worth my integrating it into what I think and believe. So, being open to people who challenge you. Obviously, Kirk had Spock. But from what I've seen, leaders continually choose a leadership team of people who will just say yes and say what the leaders are wanting to hear. And when they make stupid mistakes and they become not very amazing anymore. And the best leaders I know of have their closest leadership team as a group of people diverse and willing to challenge with respect the leader on what they decide to do. Find these people of value who follow you faithfully, but also challenge you respectfully, and you'll become a better leader in whatever it is you undertake. I want you to listen to this. I don't have a video of this. I was going to look for it and bring it up and let you watch this. But let me call up this quote. This is something I know you've probably heard before, and but I think that this gives you an idea of Kirk's command abilities. Let's see if I've got it here. I don't know if I have it in written form. I may just have it in... do you remember when Kirk said, risk is our business? He had a... what are all these ads? I'm looking for a quote, and I got all these ads popping up all over, which just muddy the waters for me. And then the quote I'm looking for really isn't even there. Let's see if it's right here or not, and I'll let you know. No, it's not there. Okay, sorry for wasting your time. But Kirk, they were in one of the episodes. They had to. Obviously, they had a goal. They had a mission they were considering doing, and he held a briefing with all of his senior officers to get their opinions on what they were doing. Is this dangerous to us? Should we be doing this next thing that I'm planning on making so? And after he heard everybody's opinions, he said, let me remind you of something. He said, risk. Well, first he says, Dr. McCoy, he says, is right in talking about the risks that are involved here. And Spock is right in what he says, and Commander Scott is obviously right in what he says. These are all good things, but let me remind you of something. He said, risk is our business. He says, that's what this ship and its crew is all about. And that's the legacy that Kirk left. That is what he, that's the style he used when he was acting the most, I can't think of the way to phrase the sentence, when he was being the leader that he needed to be. He surrounded himself with people. Even Solomon, by the way, in the Old Testament, said the wise king or the wise person surrounds himself with a multitude of counsel. But then he steps out and makes the decision. So this is what Kirk did. This is one of the attributes he had of his leadership. Don't value yes men over those people who challenge what you're doing. This is a stepping stone to good leadership qualities. Another one is make a decision to be a student of leadership. Now, still, people put very little value on learning and being a student of who actually studies and reads books. But I think the amount you're willing to invest will show in the fruit of your leadership. Maybe reading copious amounts of books is too much for you. Why not sign up to the local library and go get a book once a week? Go read something. Read on leadership skills. make your learning process be one that makes you a good leader. Now, maybe you're not a leader in your job, your career, but leadership is a skill that we all need to develop to a certain sense. I'm a parent. I have to be a good leader to my kids, to my family. Maybe that's too traditional for some of you out there. Oh, why does the man have to be the leader? I'm not talking about gender roles here. I'm talking about being leaders. So if you want to be a good leader, read about being a good leader. Study good leaders. You go over to my bookshelves over here, and you can see a host of biographies on leadership, men who were leaders, men who were considered leaders in their day and leaders in history, from ancient times all the way up through modern times. So if you want to have a decision to be a leader in your life and take on leadership qualities, be a student of what leadership is. What does leadership really mean? Next point is, don't be afraid to be a little reckless sometimes. Leaders take risks. They step out. They do things that the normal folk won't do, the average folk won't do. They step out, and not just to make themselves shine, because that would be, the motivation would be wrong, but I think to step out and do what you know is right, and do what you know is a good thing, and take the risk to make something happen. Playing it safe is a perfect way to maintain leadership and slow down the degradation of your influence. So stop playing it so safe. I can't encourage all of us who look at Kirk, who look at leadership, and I can't encourage it enough that to lead effectively, sometimes you need to be a little reckless. It's like saying to create peace, sometimes you have to make war. You got to be reckless. Kirk got his hands dirty, and he went on away missions when captains really should have left that to his subordinates. He should have stayed in that command chair on the bridge, but he went on the away missions. He shouldn't have, and he was admired by everyone and saw a significant breakthrough in his leadership skills as he did so. Don't forget the simple lessons, like being likable. Sometimes we get so deep and attempt to be so meaningful that we forget an absolute necessity of leadership, and that's having people actually like you and want to follow you. Leadership you can command it, and we've all known it from military to office place to any other number of places in life, that sometimes there are people in leadership who demand the respect. They don't command it. Kirk was funny. He was intriguing. This led people to come around to him, and he eventually just follow him. If you want to be an influential leader and you struggle with your own personal characteristics, start there. Build your personal structures to be someone that people are attracted to and want to be around. I know when I was a youth pastor at a church, very different kind of setting. We weren't out exploring new worlds. We weren't out fighting aliens and things like that. It was not military in any sense, but I was the leader of the group. And I thought the most effective way to lead these kids is to do things that make me likable to them, so they could listen to what I have to say and accept the things I had to say on that personal level. Your followers are going to follow you because of your personality. This is something Kirk had. He had that leadership skill. He was able to not demand, but command a followership, with very few exceptions. So this is that stuff about Captain Kirk that I think we can look at when it comes to leadership abilities. Now, let's move to a little different style here of looking at Kirk. Television series, motion pictures really offer us all this rich opportunity for observing psychological types in action. And this is what we got with Captain Kirk. with condensed narratives that highlight the significant moments in characters' lives, that reveal the motivations, that organize their behavior. In the J.J. Abrams film Star Trek in 2009 and Star Trek Into Darkness in 2013, we saw and witnessed the origins and early history of James T. Kirk that was only mentioned in the old original series but never really portrayed. The life-threatening adventures to become the captain of the Starship Enterprise. In his youth, Kirk develops depth and integrity as he learns to harness the power of his dominant personality functions. And he came to terms with the shadow parts of his personality. And ultimately, he is able to differentiate his dystonic functions, his ego-dystonic functions, and realize this more integrated, mature self that's capable of fulfilling his great potential for charismatic and visionary leadership. Leaders, they say, aren't born. They say they're made. But I know of some people that wouldn't make good leaders not because there's a negativity about them, but because they can't harness certain elements of being a leader. They don't have the natural charisma that it needs, that's required to be a leader. But those things can be developed, but if you don't have it by nature, it's like saying you're an artist and you want to learn how to paint, but you don't know the first thing about painting and you don't really have the acumen for it. You could probably learn the techniques and do things and practice and make some pretty fair illustrations. But it's the people with the raw talent that either sometimes bypass all of that learning that you had to do, or that on top of that, with the learning, become amazing artists. I think it's the same thing with the charisma of leadership, the visionary aspects. So let's analyze Kirk's type, and this is the core of what we're trying to get at. In assessing Kirk's psychological type, you have to first look for evidence of his preferred attitude type by considering whether his primary orientation is directed outward, that's extroversion, or inward, introversion. Carl Jung, very well known in psychiatry, the history of psychiatry. He lived from 1921 to 1971. And he was only 50 when he died. I didn't even realize that. But described the extroverted type as being consistently and routinely focused on what exists in the environment. Jung said, when a man thinks, feels, acts, and actually lives in a way that's directly correlated with the objective conditions and their demands, he is extroverted. Now, although he has subjective opinions, they're not primarily derived from introspection, but rather a response to the objective situation. What he finds compelling, valuable, and interesting comes from without, and by comparison, the contents of his internal consciousness hold little attraction. So, his interest and attention are directed to objective happenings, particularly those in his immediate environment. And not only people, but things seize and rivet his attention. Objective happenings have an almost inexhaustible fascination for him, so that ordinarily he never looks for anything else. That was more Carl Jung for you. Further, according to Jung, when you're looking at analyzing and applying this to Captain Kirk's character, according to Jung, the extroverted type is often oblivious to his own physical well-being. You know extroverted people who can be that way? They're kind of damn the torpedoes and full speed ahead. It's because their focus is fixed on what's outside of themselves. The tendency of this type, says Jung, is so outer directed that even the most obvious of all subjective facts, the conditions of his own body, receive scant attention. Now, there was a guy named Joseph Wheelwright in 1982 who gave an evocative description of the extroverted type, highlighting the qualities of the attitude as romantic and adventurous. And given the immediacy of the moment, unreflective and uncomfortable with looking inward. These are people who, the romance and the adventure is a great way to put it. They see those things on the outside, and they're drawn to that, and those are the things that make them move, that motivate them. This is what Kirk was like. Yet, so immediately detached from what might be deeper down. The feelings, the suppressed things, the things that are pushed down deliberately. They give into the immediacy of the moment, these people, unreflective, uncomfortable with looking inside. And extroverts are at ease in the outer world with objects, with people, with situations. They're likely to look on any subjective activity as morbidly introspective. They tend to be impulsive and even oblivious to the impact of their actions. So extroverts can jump into new situations very easily without a moment's hesitation. And when they make a mistake, it hardly touches them, and they may be caught again in the same kind of error. That's what these extroverted people do. With these criteria in mind, take a look at Captain Kirk again. He was predominantly an extroverted type. You didn't see him as being closed and introspective, and he had those moments, but he didn't let those things affect him on a great deal because he was so driven by the outward. He consistently demonstrates an attunement to the world around him. Kirk consistently registered and reacted to the outer situation with little to no pause for reflection of any kind. In an early scene, you see Kirk seated at a bar. This is in the movies now, the J.J. Abrams movies. And in a matter of minutes, makes a pass at a young female cadet. And he ends up in a brawl with 4 burly men. He repeatedly exerts himself to engage with others, often with mixed results. But the experiences seem to energize and motivate him. That's what got his juices going. And even when he ends up with a bruised and bloody body and face as a result. And after he's defeated in the barroom fight, if you remember that scene, he's thrown on top of a table, finally, on his back, nose bloodied, lips busted open, and thoroughly beaten and drunk on top of it. That's when you have the character of Captain Pike enters the room and calls off the attackers. He settles into it. This is now, by the way, this is a bar that's like full of cadets and full of Starfleet personnel. And so he meanders in there and he stops the fight. He suggests that Kirk could do a little more with his life than only genius-level repeat offender, and he called him the only genius-level offender in the Midwest. And this was on Earth, by the way, when this was happening, if you didn't know that. So Pike compares Kirk to his father, George Kirk, saying that he too didn't believe in the no-win scenario, and that he had that instinct to leap without looking. Pike challenges Kirk to do better. He invites him to enter Starfleet Academy to become an officer and eventually command a starship of his own. And in a characteristically extroverted fashion, Kirk is next seen driving up to the launching location on a motorcycle. He hands the keys to a stranger and leaves his old life behind him forever. And apparently without a moment's hesitation, Kirk is always alert to what's happening around him, picking up on chance remarks, noticing the details in his immediate environment that others might miss. And throughout, he is action-oriented. He's fixated on the situation at hand. He's heedless of his physical condition. He's motivated by external stimuli and largely unaware of his inner world. So here is Kirk, who we find out in this movie that's exploring how he got to be who he was in the mythology of Star Trek. You've got a guy that is extroverted. He's outward. He looks for the bold moves and the adventures. He has the intellect to discern what's going on around him, to see what's going on. But he has the unhoned attribute of jumping into things with both feet. He hasn't been through his command experience yet. He hasn't learned the things that he needs to learn to be the commander, to hone those skills. So, with a solid hypothesis about Kirk's preferred attitude being extroverted, we've now got to consider his dominant and interior functions. And these make up what's called the spine of the personality. And now remember, we're looking at Kirk here, but do you notice how all of this stuff is very relevant for us as well? This is what was put into this character. And even if it wasn't consciously written about the character, you can see all these qualities in this person. It's the spine of personality, a vertical axis between the superior function and the inferior function. And defining a person's conscious standpoint, accordingly, we can't determine the preferred attitude conclusively without considering the dominant function to which it's attached. It's not possible, folks, to demonstrate the introverted and extroverted attitudes per se. That's it. That is in isolation. It's really hard to do. Whether a person is one way or the other only becomes apparent in association with one of the four functions. And to narrow the options, look at this. Whether Kirk seems to act more from a rational and judging, thinking or feeling, is how I'm using that word, discernement, or an irrational and perceiving, sensing or intuiting perspective. The rational functions have an orderly and predictable organization that leads from data, external stimuli, to a conclusion. Thinking and feeling are called rational because they are both based on the reflective. It's what you see, it's what you take in, it's what you do as a result of that. Linear processes that coalesce into particular judgments that we make. And again, by judgment, I don't mean prejudice or bigotry or anything like that. I mean the judgment that you use to make things happen, how you justify your actions. And so by contrast, the irrational functions are not oriented to a reasoning process. They take in the raw data as it is, fully formed. The physical perception of something does not depend on logic. Things just are. This is so unlike Spock, who we looked at. Similarly, an intuition exists in itself. This is where, by the way, Kirk and Spock, and I see we're at just about the end of the show, but let's point this out before we have to quit, and we'll pick this up tomorrow. Kirk and Spock were so different because one thing that threw Spock about Kirk as he was learning to know him was that he did not understand the intuitional moves that Kirk would make because they defied logic sometimes. So Kirk was this extroverted character overall that was motivated by the stimuli around him. And with this qualification in mind, it's apparent that Kirk is more of an irrational than a rational type. This threw Spock for a loop all the time. There's nothing remotely methodological about Kirk's approach to life. He reacts to the situation in the moment, operating on an instantaneous assessment of facts, trusting his own instincts, his own interpretations, and his own conclusions, without hesitation. He expends no effort on explaining unless forced to do so in order to convince others to follow his lead. But he would clearly prefer to simply direct, then persuade. He doesn't want to have to persuade. It's trust me. Trust me. You know I know what I'm doing. And that's where we're going to leave off on Kirk today. We're out of time. I could talk about this for hours as well. I hope this is useful information to you, as well as a great look at a fictional character. We're going to come back tomorrow. We're going to pick this up where we left off. Kirk, my hero, from my childhood, continuing, ongoing, examining who he is as a fictional character and the real elements that made him who he was. So that's it for today, folks. Thanks for listening. We're going to take a 23-hour break. You sit tight, and we'll be back.